I don't normally speak with this thing in my head. I know, do any of you walk around with this? I feel like kind of Garth Brooksy, though. Do you remember when Garth Brooks used to wear this thing? You know, you're like, that's really cool. What is that thing? It's like, hey, it's a microphone. So I will tell you that it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. The Ross Leadership Institute and all of my friends at Otterbein, specifically Kathy Crendel, who create these forums, you know, because they have this unbridled passion that we can share with one another our experiences so we can just become the best possible versions of ourselves. And if we all learn from each other, best not keep it to each other. My remarks came from, I would say, a confluence of things that occurred to me in about a year or so ago. So I have to say that in 2017, I was honored to be awarded a WELD Women of Achievement. Debbie's involved. Kathy's been there. So my daughter, who said last night, now what are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to talk about, you know, my WELD remarks. And she said, are you ever going to let that go? That was over a year ago. And I said, look, your mother was on a calendar. And of the top 10 things I ever thought I'd achieve in my life, Calendar Girl was absolutely never one of them. But in all seriousness, that opportunity really allowed me the time to pause for 1 second and reflect a little bit about who I am and how I got here, and also think about how I was going to use those things positively to influence other lives. The other confluence of things that occurred last year were more personal and emotional. So my oldest son, Charlie, graduated from high school and he left me, just like in the big fat Greek wedding. Why you want to leave me? He did. My daughter turned 17 years old. Might I say anything else to you other than I have a 17-year-old daughter at home who always tries and tests me. Pretty good kid, however. I turned 53. I know, I don't look, just say it. I don't look 50. Really, there's no way. I turned 53. And about that time, Fifth Third Bank gave me the opportunity to be the market president here in Columbus. And, you know, all those things make you stop a second to think about what's ahead of you. And I don't know if you've heard the analogy that when your bike ride comes to the other side of the mountain, you tend to pick up steam. And I am picking up steam in my energy around making a real difference for the people, places, and things that are important to me. So I kept coming up with this so what kind of stuff, right? So the first thing around, you know, the discovery around how you got here was the so what. And there's 3 things. I call it the power of 3. Most people say don't focus on more than 3 things, stick to 3. So the power of 3 around my so what comments will then lead me to the 3 things on the now what side of things that I hope to test a little bit of some of the cultural norms and things that you might otherwise have heard before and think about them a little differently. So what? Guess what? I'm Greek. So my buddy Frank and Alex are in the audience. They're Greek as well. What's significant about that? First of all, Nia Vardalos, or Tula, in the wedding, and Mrs. Hanks made a fortune of my life story, an absolute fortune of my life story. My father owned a restaurant in Mount Vernon, Ohio. My brother and I both worked in the restaurant. I chose to marry a non-Greek. And just like poor Eon Miller, my husband had no clue what was about to happen to him. And yes, we are loud, we interfere, we get in each other's business, and we're a very passionate group of people. Now, who saw the movie? Just show of hands, right? What did you enjoy most about My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Beyond the Windex. Will, were you prompted? He must have read the script. Now, let me just also say 3 things, although I'm curious to hear about what you liked about the movie. The Windex thing's not a Greek thing. There's only 3 things I disagree with in the movie. The Windex thing's not a Greek thing. That happened to be her family thing, okay? But look, it seemed to cure whatever ails you, so I'd try it. I mean, it works. The second thing is that most Greek immigrants value education. and higher education. None of them preferred that their sons got a higher degree than their daughters. They all really believed in higher education. That was part of what we were going to do. And no Greek grandmother I know is senile. Let me just tell you that right now. Not a one of them sharp as tacks. Frank's like, oh God, yeah, trust me, sharp as tacks. But everyone can relate to something about that movie because it spoke to you about who you were. And the one thing that I discovered about myself in the eyes of what I learned was a couple things. When my parents met and married, they immigrated here from Greece, met here, married here, and we were in Mount Vernon, Ohio. Show of hands. My dad owned the Ohio restaurant in Mount Vernon, Ohio. Some people know of the Ohio restaurant. We were a minority in a very small town in Mount Vernon. 5% of the people spoke a language other than English at that time. But I would tell you that we were encouraged to reach out and to share our cultural difference. That is, in fact, what provided the richness of the community that we lived in, and that in turn gave us the power to be comfortable in who we are and to lean in on what made us great. What a better place we would be today if we would all have that same philosophy, that true pride of our origin and where we are. I'm sensing a group think mentality here, right? The East, the West, the North, the South, the right, the left. My so what is that we all ought know what makes us great. And part of being great is why a difference makes you unique. Not hiding from it, but leaning into it, I think makes a lot more sense than in today's norm. I used to have an old boss, so every time he'd move me to a different department, he'd say one thing to me. He'd say, Fran, change them before they change you. Change them before they change you. What happens? You come in, you have new ideas, you have new thought streams, and people kind of move you into their kind of cultural norms. Because I grew up a little different in a small town, I feel very comfortable as the only woman president of Fifth Third Bank today. And it's my great value and opportunity to open people up to my differences so we're a much more fulfilled and better culture. Does that make sense? Encourage it, work with it, lean into it. My second so what surrounds this whole topic of success. Here are a couple of my favorite books, and I would tell you that, for lack of a better word, Kathy, I wasn't a great student, but as I grow old, I would tell you that I've become the student of success. Like, who gets it? How do you define it? How do you keep it? If you lose it, how do you get it back? You know, and what do you do with it? Wooden and Mindset are two books that you will often see referred to by other leadership books. Debbie, you showed me say, hey, here's Doug Kreidler's speech to you. And then the first thing Doug Kreidler says, I've never read a book on leadership. And you're like, holy crap, really? Were any of you there? I'm like, never? I said, man, you're missing out. Although Doug's a great leader, maybe I should stop reading the books on leadership. But I love this stuff, right? I love coaches and how do they win and how do they lose and how do they come back and all that stuff. The most important thing to me isn't any of the things you learn in the leadership book, but it's the definition of what it really is. And that was one of my discoveries. So let me start with what it's not. It's not a corner office. It has nothing to do with belongings. That's first and foremost. There's no working diagram of it. So although somebody had a pattern, and I'd like to emulate that pattern of success, there's no template for it. And the most important thing that I've discovered that I hope you share with me is that this is your fill-in-the-blank moment. Success is only defined by one person, and that's you. It's knowing you did your best to get the best outcome under the current situation that you're in, and don't worry about a couple things. What does that mean? Your success is unique to you, and it isn't in a vacuum, right? When you're given an opportunity, a project, something that you're working on, you have a swirl of things surrounding you, and you're going to do the best you can do with all those crazy bubbles. The best analogy I ever heard is life's a big bubble, and within the bubble, there's little bubbles. Family, spiritual, work, health, well-being. And bubbles expand and contract within the big bubble as they need to, because there's only one size that it all fits into. So give yourself a break in a minute and say, there's so many things that are happening in my life. I'm going to do the best I can do in that possible moment. Who's ever heard, give it your all? Give it 110%. Give it 110%. Get rid of that 110 BS. It's 100, man. And 99.9 pretty damn good too. Sorry, pretty good, right? Forget this whole 110%. There is no 110%.
Wait, this is the third half.
1.6667. We're 2/3 better. One and 2/3 better, right? That's not part of my presentation, so you can't know. I didn't tell you the bank shouldn't aspire to do more. I'm telling you, I'm telling you about me, a little Greek girl from Mount Vernon, Ohio. And then the other thing would be, we love comparisons, right? My Susie, my friend, my sister, don't give a darn about what others think. I read an article on the Olympics once, and I can't even tell you who the gal was. She was a gymnast. This was several Olympics ago, and it was in the Business Journal. And this guy wrote this article about this girl, and she's, this wonderful Olympian, and she did this triple hoochie backflip, and she fell on her rear end. Can you believe she fell on her rear end? And the journalist wrote, yeah, the girl fell on her rear end while you sat on your rear end watching. Anybody who wants to criticize you for taking a chance or a risk, sitting on their rear end watching. I'd rather fall while somebody's watching. The other thing that Kathy referred to, and I think that's awfully nice of her to say so, but it's really, to whom much is given, much is expected. And maybe it's the older I get and the more things you see and as life trips you up a little bit, all these things that you see above the glacier line are true, 100% true. But there's a thought in my head that can't differentiate why I'm standing here in front of you today and why I might have been somewhere else. As I served on the James Cancer Hospital board for about 10 years, we'd have our meetings at the James. And you're rushing, and it was a noon meeting, and you had a morning appointment and an afternoon appointment, and you're racing around, and you pulled up to the James, and they were very nice. They'd valet your car. And as you walked through the hospital, you saw people in great need. And do you know what the difference between the people in a room or people in a waiting room waiting to hear a verdict about a loved one and me is? Or you? Nothing. One phone call. The dividing line between me being in a room or waiting for a loved one or me being able to help somebody in that board meeting is about razor thin. And if we don't stop to realize that, and in turn, try and use our great fortune to help others, what a tragedy that might be. So that drives my passion to help people on the education front, on the healthcare side, and and with women and what we're trying to do, and children and all of it. So I ask that you think about what you're doing and how you're helping, and it doesn't have to be huge. One person makes a big difference. Giving back's important. So here's where I get a little weighty in my dialogue and discussion in my three kind of so whats. 10 years ago, I was turned on to this theory of appreciative inquiry. And has anybody heard about appreciative inquiry? Oh, you're the greatest. Thank you so much. And anybody read Shirzad's book, Positive Intelligence? We've heard of IQ. You heard of emotional intelligence, EQ. This is a new thing. I don't know how new it is, but new to me, discovery called positive intelligence. So let me start on the left-hand side around appreciative inquiry. The whole premise and basis of the book is, if you build upon your strengths, you will, in essence, mitigate your weaknesses. Is that how you understand it? Thank you. So that's the Cliff version. You don't have to read the book. The truth of the matter is, nobody works that way. Most companies don't work that way. Let me prove my point. How many meetings were you called to last week or last month because you had to solve a problem? Something's wrong. Something's not going well. How many meetings were problem-solving kind of meetings or sessions? Areas of improvement. How many meetings were you called to last week? Or phone calls did you get to say, "You rocked, man. We are so good here. Let's talk about how we can get even better." How many? Not many. Seriously? Appreciative Inquiry is a really cool book that makes you really think hard. So let me then say about 4 years ago, I was turned on to this positive intelligence. Shirzad Shamin wrote this positive intelligence book. So now my whole theory and premise around, a good idea is there's some fact-based findings here, around neuroscience. Here's this premise. You have 2 quadrants of your brain. And keep looking at this stat right here, please. Oh, look, I have a fancy pointer. Look at this. And this is real. 2 sides of your brain. One side has saboteurs. And let me read to you what saboteurs sound like. And they're self-sabotage, right? You think too much about the things that you aren't and that you can't accomplish. Those things are called stickler, pleaser, hypervigilant, restless, controller, avoider, hyperachiever, victim, hyperrational, and the judge, which is the mother of all things, that always makes you think you're not doing enough. That's in your brain. On the right-hand side of your brain, maybe or the left, I don't know which, but the other side is what they call the sage. It's where you have wisdom. It's where your confidence grows. You can, to a great degree, control how you feel, how positive you are, by, in essence, focusing on one side or the other of your brain. You're doing this to yourself to a great degree. Influences do it to us to some degree. This statistic around 20% of teams and people reaching their full potential, that's crazy. And to think that there's, to some degree, something we have some control over. Here's the other interesting thing. Shirzad sent documents out to the top CEOs in the country. And they all sent back, they said, tell me one thing that you're afraid to tell anybody. Tell me one thing that keeps you up at night. Tell me. Every top CEO in the company came back with feelings of insufficiency, feelings of not being loved and being unworthy. Every single one of them. An overwhelming number. So, where am I going with all this? Like really, come on, man, wrap it up. By affirming what makes you great, by working on strengthening the wonderful qualities that you have, you will, in essence, have a more fulfilled and better life, and most certainly have more success, as we define it. The saboteurs, they're inherent in your personality. I'm not telling you to ignore them, but understanding them, which ones you have the most of, will help you then mitigate and understand how to deal with them. But don't walk away thinking you're going to get rid of them. We were in the class around these things. So I also want to thank you for making me, we had a bishop who came to our church. Our bishop came to our church, and as he was chatting to the members, and he's a wonderful person, and he's got such a nice way about him, he was pointing. And he said, "Oh, brethren," he said, "please don't misconstrue my pointing to you as I'm shaming." He said, "As I'm pointing one finger to you, I have 3 pointing back at myself." I have 3 pointing back at myself. So if you're interested in what your saboteurs are, you can go on to Shirzad's website. You can just pull up positive intelligence, and you can take this test, this PQ test, And based upon how you answer the questions, it tells you what your saboteurs are. And again, in the classroom, one of the ladies that, when I first took this, said, yeah, see, I have this issue and I want to get rid of it. You're like, no, you're not going to get rid of it. But understanding it helps you understand how to deal with it, and more importantly, its influence on others, including coworkers and loved ones, and what to do with it. So what am I saying? Spend more time amplifying what makes you great and not worrying about how you fix things. This takes practice. This takes a lot of practice, personally and professionally. One little thing I did during the workday, and I've done it for 7 years. It took me like 3 years to get people to get it. But I start every meeting off with, we have a staff meeting every 2 weeks. The first thing I ask everybody who comes to the meeting, what's the best thing that happened to you from the last time we met? Kindness matters. And at first they're like, what, like, do you mean like at home, or do you mean here at work, or do you mean about my numbers? And I was like, I'm just asking you the simple question. It evokes the sage and the positive influence. We'll fix the problem. I mean, the problems are what they are. They're always going to be something to deal with. Let's start from an area of strength, and let's become the best possible versions of ourselves that we can be. So all this, understanding who you are, making sure that you understand what your own definition of success is, and who you are, building on sage, that's the so what for me part of what I've discovered. But what am I going to do with all this great knowledge? And so this is where I want to challenge some of the cultural norms, especially for women. Men the same, but you hear all this thing, get a mentor. Mentoring is great, get a mentor. So I have to tell you a story about myself, and every time I tell the story, it almost brings me to tears, and you're going to think I made it up, and I might have, because you'll never be able to check, but the truth is funnier than fiction. So in 1986, when I was graduating from Miami University, I was going to come to Otterbein. Let me just be clear. And so a long story, it's Otterbein or Miami. And I told Kathy, when my poor father, who owned a restaurant, we had a big breakfast, big lunch. It was a tiny place. We didn't grow up with much. He saw the rack rate between Otterbein and Miami. We didn't know any different. My parents didn't go to college. They didn't have, my father didn't finish high school. My mother did. But he said, my child, he said in his Greek epithachium, we said, I love Otterbein, it's nice, but 3 times the price of Miami? And I had no clue what he was talking about. I said, what do you mean 3 times the price? I didn't know. I said, Pop, don't worry about it. I go to Miami. I followed in my brother's footsteps, and now my son's there, and the rest is history. But my daughter's going to come to Otterbein. And at 17, she follows every direction I give her. So I'm telling her she's going to Tiffin. Okay? You got to wake up pretty early in the morning and pull one over on me. In 1986, when the bank was interviewing candidates, they were administering these personality tests. Anybody ever take some of those when you were? I mean, they're predictive indicators. I don't know what the hell they were then, but I don't know what they were then, but that's what they're supposed to be. Like, hey, here are all the people that are successful in our company, and they seem like this. Let's back that up against all the people we're interviewing. So you went through your whole day of interviews, and I had actually 2 women who interviewed me, which was very unusual in 1986, I can tell you that. Tina Waymeyer and Linda Eastman. Linda Eastman to this day is my mentor. I mean, more than a mentor, and let me explain. Interviews went great. I took the predictive indicator. Not so good. It did not indicate that I would be a successful candidate for employment at Fifth Third Bank. I didn't know. So I get this call. Linda was trying to play it really cool. Hey, yeah, everything cool, everything went great, yeah. Just, you coming to Cincinnati anytime soon? We'd like you to take that test again. I said, what test? They said, that test you took at the end of the day? Oh, I said, that thing that asked me if I like to do a jigsaw puzzle or walk a dog or, I don't know, cure cancer. Those were like the choices in one of the questions I remember. I said, oh yeah, man, I'm going to a date party, because I was awfully fired up, probably had a good looking date. I'll be down there. 2 weeks later, I took the same test. Guess what? Huh? My personality hadn't changed in 2 weeks. Bipkus. Bad. There is no reason that I should have been hired by Fifth Third Bank. All rights reserved. And in today's world, if that would have happened, we'd have been in big trouble. What I found out was, we were a $3 billion bank at the time. We're 140 today. Tina Waymeyer and Linda Eastman went prancing down to Bob Preby's office. God rest his soul. Bob's no longer alive. I find this out later because, and they saw something in me that I don't think I saw in myself. But they knew that I would provide value to this organization in some way, shape, or form, and they fought for me. So as Bob Preby says, he filed 19, the predictive indicating score, and they offered me a job. And the rest is history. I don't know what you do to offer your gratitude and thanks for two people with that influence. You know, it was kind of meant to be. But what I will tell you is that my life has forever changed. You know, 30 plus years later, my husband, Jim Henry, not Eon Miller, I met at Fifth Third. We have 2 lovely children. I have some level of accumulated wealth that I try to do something with for a broader good, and I lift as somebody else helped pull. And without those 2 in my life, that would have absolutely never occurred. So mentoring is a very nice thing. It's a very interesting concept, but I'm asking you, whose life are you willing to lean in and make a real difference for? Because you don't know what kind of difference it'll make, but it'll make a huge difference. Someone's got to do it for the next gen, just like they did it for me. Forget mentoring. Make a difference. The second concept is what I call get back up. So, you know, I always find it interesting when people want to say to you, here's the one that you've always heard, take risks. Come on, take a risk. Jump off the building, see how that works out for you. Slide in head first. Like, I always find it interesting, like, how many people would even know, like, how could they judge my risk tolerance? And why would they be so willing to throw me off a bridge? I don't know. And I would ask you to think about it in somewhat of a different way. I think this quote's fantastic, especially for all the women. I mean, sorry, but you know, this was my weld. But it's true, right? We have to be 110%, and I hate that. 102% ready for something. Guys are like, I'm halfway there. Yeah, shit, I'm going for that job. Whew, I got this. I mean, this is so doggone true. But instead of this whole concept of taking risks, what if we think about allowing yourself to make mistakes? What? I mean, you're type A personalities. Who the heck wakes up at 7:30 to come listen to me? I mean, seriously. I mean, I'm speaking to the choir here saying, what? Are you kidding me? I think we have to start thinking about this whole concept of mistakes as a stepping stone to success, right? Not a failure. Falling down is part of life, and, you know, getting back up's living, and maybe if you're not falling enough, you're not reaching your full potential. So here's another cool one. You know, Thomas Watson Sr., he's the founder of IBM, said, and I quote, "Double your rate of failure. Failure is a teacher. A harsh one, perhaps, but the best. So go ahead, make mistakes. Make all you can. Because that's where you'll find success on the far side of failure." Now, I don't know what's happened to IBM lately, but my suspicion is they've lost that philosophy in the share price and the company's performance. Wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from mistakes. Make them, learn from them, and for God's sakes, don't make excuses for them. I always say to people, they say, God, it's so great. You're the president. Look what you've accomplished. And I say, yeah, falling off the top rung of the ladder going to cause a heck of a bruise more than the one from the bottom of the ladder. But I'll show my bruises. I'll be the gymnast who falls. while somebody else is sitting around watching. I'm good with that. So here's my last encouragement to all of you, other than really leaning in and making a difference, other than saying it's okay to fail, try it, is this thing called the halo effect. So I'm a banker, so you'll excuse, the reference to numbers. But this concept really comes from the power of one. So let's try the math. Ask.com. I mean, this is high-level stuff. They probably teach us at Otterbein. Look it up on Ask.com. Says that in your lifetime, you will meet 10,000 people. Someone's shaking their head. Of the 10,000 people you'll meet, you will significantly change the lives of 10. Like significantly, like Tina and Linda did for me. They talk about in the military, right? People who are leading the brigades, the generals. For whatever reason, their intuition said, let's take a left down this road, not a right. And the right caused mass destruction, bomb a vehicle the left avoided. That's what I'm talking about, significant, right? Let's say there were 40 people in this room. And if all 40 of us subscribe to the halo effect and change the lives of 10 people, and then those people change the lives of 10 more people, and then 10 more people, and then just 5 generations, that would be 4 million people that we would have the grave responsibility of changing the lives of. It works, right? It works if we learn from what we know, if we lean in to what we believe, and we want to change some of those cultural norms. It'll make a big difference. So what? I say one, we celebrate our differences, okay? Because that's what makes us unique, and that's how we provide the power of hope. I say that we define success on our own terms and not care what other people think. But if we make a mistake, promise me that you'll get back up. And I say that we build from our strengths to feed our sage. And at the end of the day, the wonderful thing about growing up Greek is we don't take life too terribly seriously. I mean, who in the world would roast a lamb, pour a glass of ouzo, laugh at themselves and anything else? You really got to be able to have that balance. Now, we don't roast a lamb in the front yard. I mean, come on. We choose to roast it in the backyard. But you got to have a little sense of humor, which I hope you sense from me today. And if you can't laugh at yourself, call me. I would be happy to laugh at you. And if you can't find ouzo, tequila is a fine replacement for your coffee in the morning. That's my secret. And I thank you for your time today and allowing me to share a little bit of my wisdom with you.